Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is an ethical hacker, a white hat hacker, a biohacker, an author, so much more. His name is Len No. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hi, Christian. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, man.
It's a pleasure, man. It's a pleasure. When I saw that the wonderful Latanya, shout out to Latanya,
Latanya is awesome.
she has
Real quick, the O'Kelly factor.
absolutely. I can't count how many guests she has put forward to me over the years now, and every guest has been an absolute pleasure to converse with. And yeah, just a massive shout out to her. Thank you very much. And yeah, when I was sitting going through my show notes and doing the research for this, and then I put it out to my audience, and they were excited about it, and I was excited about it, and then I kind of realized what the topic is. Because obviously you got to sit down, you got to do your research and everything. Always do your research. And
Always.
I actually did an episode for my Patreon show about transhumanism. I want to say like 6 months ago. And yeah, I picked the topic randomly. And I was fascinated because it was like, oh, wow, there are human beings in the world that are altering their body with tech that can enhance or change the way the human body reacts to things. And I just went down a rabbit hole, and it was fascinating. And it is particularly fascinating given where we're at with the world right now, because obviously AI is taking over. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter how much I bitch and moan about it. It's you have to accept that AI is just a part of society now. However, we can what we do now is going to dictate the next 25 years of what human life is like for us day to
I think
day.
you're a little short-sighted on that. I think what we're doing today is actually going to reshape human evolution on so many different levels. When we talk about the concept of just transhumanism in general, when you were doing your research, I'm assuming you saw the two different distinct paths of either from Dr. Julian Huxley, one of your countrymen. He was the actual scientist, or he wasn't a scientist. He was a good Lord, natural science professor, I believe, but he was the one that actually coined the term back in 1956. And then you had FM 2030. Did you run into him during your research?
I haven't, no.
Okay. All right. So when it comes to transhumanism, you basically had the two different philosophies. Julian Huxley, as I said, brought up the term transhumanism in his essay, New Bottles for New Wines. And Dr. Huxley's philosophy was you should be able to use technology to reestablish a baseline for humanity. So therefore, if let's say you injured your leg, a crutch would be considered a technological tool, and you can do that to bring yourself back up to normal. Same thing with a pacemaker or a hearing aid. But Dr. Huxley's philosophy was you should not enhance the human being. You should be able to bring the damaged or deficient human back up to, a standard baseline. Then a little while later, I'd say mid 80s, you had a gentleman who legally changed his name to FM 2030. And I'm grateful that he did, because he had one of those foreign names that I looked at and went, I cannot pronounce this. And most people may not know FM by his name, but most people know his legacy. FM 2030 was actually one of the godfathers of cryogenics. So he was one of the first people to actually get into the idea of putting a human body into a cryostasis to be potentially reanimated later once whatever disease or ailment that was affecting them, there was a cure for. His philosophy on transhumanism was everything is on the table. So instead of just coming back up to the baseline, if you wanted to, one of the examples I use all the time that I think really kind of showcased FM's philosophy was, let's say I worked at a steel foundry or some place where there was corrosive elements against the human biological flesh. FM's philosophy said that I should be able to go in, have my arm amputated, have it replaced with a prosthetic that maybe has 500 pounds of foot pressure in the grip strength, could not be affected by, excessive heat or corrosive materials. And if you can enhance or better the life of the human, that should be okay. And those are basically the two distinct tracks. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot, and I'm sure we're going to get into it over the course of this conversation, being someone that currently has 10 different additions to their body of different technological capabilities. If I had an issue, say diabetes, or I was, deaf, nobody would look at me sideways if I was using a continuous glucose meter or an insulin pump or a hearing aid. But the minute you choose to step outside of what is considered stereotypically normal, it becomes an entirely different thing.
It's a very solid point as well. And as you were discussing that, it was refreshing my memory about some of the ethical concerns that I came across. And one of them being, it's one thing to, let's say, get an implant that enhances something like, let's say, sight or your hearing, etc., or even just like different ways of interaction. Like, for instance, there was a very famous guy. Again, I can't remember his name. I'm terrible with memory today. But like, I think like the main person who's pushing transhumanism forward at the moment,
Neil Harbisson.
That's the one. Thank you very much. And
his partner Moon Reba and the Transhuman Foundation.
Correct. Yeah, and he has like
it's called the iBorg. It's that's the one. Implant that is actually attached at the base of the back of his skull. He was born with a vision deficiency, and this actually allows him to essentially see colors in patterns. And he is actually another one of your countrymen, originally from the UK. And a shout out to the UK government for this, because you guys were actually the very first country to ever acknowledge someone as a cyborg, because Neil Harbisson actually was granted permission from the UK government to have his appliance included in his passport.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. He is the first globally recognized cyborg, and the only person, to the best of my knowledge, that has been able to get a government approval for something like this on such a legal document.
Makes you wonder if the UK government has kind of seen where the patterns are moving forward and they want to get ahead of the curve on that, perhaps.
Well, the weird thing is the UK acknowledged the cyborg, but Sweden actually did a project a while back where they actually offered up the ability to implant their, what we would say here in the United States is essentially their social security or their globally unique identifier to the government, almost like you would if you had a lost pet. It doesn't contain all of their personal information, but it contains a record locator that then emergency services and governments could actually use that to get to their, PII and actually be able to help them in an emergency situation. So Sweden actually adopted it on a governmental scale, but didn't call it cyborg or transhumanism, whereas the UK actually looked at Neil Harbisson and said, you know what? You're a cyborg, here's your document. So, I mean, they are definitely on the progressive side, but I still have to say, I think Sweden was a little bit, they arrived at the party a little earlier.
This is the thing as well. Like I know in the UK, we've been, or certain people who used to be in government have been trying to push the idea of like digital IDs and stuff like that, which some countries have authored. I know Estonia has a system that's like that. Mm-hmm. And I think what I gather is that people are terrified, myself included, of this idea of being completely trackable wherever you go, whatever you do. Now, the thing with that, though, of course, is that, these track you everywhere you go. They're literally listening devices. It's freaky. But then we're obviously moving to a system now where cash is going to be slowly phased out, and then you'll be trackable wherever you go, whatever you do, based on your payments and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So we're already headed towards that.
Oh yeah, and even beyond that, if we're going down that road for just a minute under wild, reckless speculation,
Sure.
when one of the big pushes here in the United States from our current administration that's on the way out was the push to force electric vehicles.
Mm.
And the one thing that I tell people all the time is we are, as human beings, we are the ultimate product for sale. And the more data that they can have on us, the easier it is to be sold to. You're talking about the cell phones being a tracking and a listening device. So are every modern car. And if we move to a digital currency, any type of side deals that you might want to make to have your friend come over and help, pay him $20 to help you move a couch, that becomes now taxable, income. If we use digital electric vehicles, there's the ability to basically check in and log every time you charge this thing at whatever charging station, on top of the fact that most vehicles are now directly connected to the internet through Wi-Fi and cellular. So the idea that we can go anywhere anymore and be anonymous is almost impossible, unless you've got like an old 1978 Pinto.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like if you live off the grid, it's I suppose possible, but even then there are like certain restrictions on it, and that, from what I can gather, is what people are most afraid of is like the loss of those freedoms. Because like I always try to look at it from an objective perspective. So, for example, I can see, as you outlined there, the security benefit of having, say, a chip which tracks you. Because, for example, just on a side note, I'm a big fan of true crime. Been watching a lot of that lately. Binge watching it on Netflix. Honestly, it's really well done. But anyway, one thing I notice pretty much all the time is that in many of these cases, a person wasn't able to be tracked until the last minute. Now, obviously, that's better now in say the last 5 to 10 years, but it's not completely foolproof. Whereas if you had something
No,
like that, you'd be able to track exactly
not
where they are.
necessarily. Absolutely not. And that's the one thing that, one of the things that I did in my book is try to really dispel a lot of the misconceptions about the current technology. There is nothing that you can get right now from a consumer level. Now, I'm not going to
Right.
speak to what the governments can do, because let's be honest, the governments are doing a lot of stuff that we don't know about, and we don't know what we don't know. But the ability to put a GPS tracking chip into a human being is not something that we have on any type of consumer base at this point. Honestly, there's not a single implantable piece of technology that is consumer grade and purchasable that has any internal power at all. All of the chips that you can buy, all of my current implants are all passive powered. So they're basically getting their power from the receivers. Um, just quick off the top, since we haven't gotten into it yet. Like I said, I have 10 different microchips in my body between my elbows and my fingertips. I can interface to near field communication. So basically, every mobile device that's been built within the last year to 3 years will have this type of capability. I can also directly interface to RFID. This is the same technology that you would use if you've ever gotten like an access badge into a building. When you have that little card, you go up to get into a door, there's always a little box that you have to put your card next to. That box is the receiver, and it's actually putting out an energy field that when the chip comes in within that field, it will energize and it will actually transfer data. But otherwise, all of the implants that I have and anything that you can personally buy is passive 99% of the time until it comes within contact with a receiver. So the ability to do any type of like GPS tracking chip, it really doesn't have the ability. I mean, I remember when we had that nice 2.5 year vacation a couple of years back called COVID.
Huh.
And, everybody was like, oh, they're putting trackers in us.
Yeah,
I can
at
tell
the
you,
time I was like I was calling BS on that. I was like, okay,
yeah,
I can
no.
yeah. Mm.
People don't realize and this is
What?
for the people that are actually watching on the YouTube channel. The needle is almost as big as the end of this pen.
Mm.
You're talking about a needle that is not something that 99.9% of the world would have sat there and taken an injection from during COVID. Additionally, go ahead.
The only thing I've read about that even remotely would be close to that, as you mentioned before, that's like commercially purchasable is, I think it is in Sweden. Yeah, the chip that allows you to get into, say, like a residence or like your place of work or something like that.
They're passive.
What would you?
That's what this is. If I'm assuming you can see the circle on the top
Right,
of my
but
hand there.
it gives you the ability to say get into
Yes.
like a residence or whatever if it's programmed that way.
Most of those types of chips are falling under RFID, and they're going into access protocols.
Right.
Like the same ones that you would get if you went into some type of a commercial building, and those would fall into the top ones would be either Prox, Indala, HID, Pyramid. But my chips have the ability to emulate almost 400 different unique access systems. But once again, the chip gets programmed, and then the chip has to come into contact with the receiver in order to actually exchange information and actually do anything.
So I've got a few questions regarding your implants because
Sure.
my audience is interested in this, and I am, particularly for a security perspective for yourself. So first question, shout out to Vilma for these. Could you ever be hacked yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I can be hacked. And the one thing that, and this is a great segue into this point, I'm not sure about the UK, but here in the United States, we have a division of our government called the FDA, which stands for the Food and Drug Administration. In the US, this is the governmental agency that is responsible for the safety of medical devices. During the research for my book, I came to the realization that this department of the government doesn't have any actual cybersecurity people working within it.
Jesus.
All of the testing that is done on medical devices is done through the device manufacturers, outsourced or whatnot. But at the same time, all these manufacturers, people like ResMed, it's the first one that jumped off the top of my mind. All of these people are essentially doing the research and then just submitting a report to the government with the results. The government is not double checking those results. So to that fact, there have been, if you pay any attention to the DEF CON conference, and if you're not familiar with that is actually the largest hacker conference in the world, and it happens every year in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have been able to show over the years how we could attack pacemakers, glucose pumps. The only reason we haven't had an issue with people dying yet is that no bad actor has decided to actually exploit these vulnerabilities. But we've shown that medical devices can be, even, the ones that you get through hospitals, chains, and through medical providers, these are also vulnerable. Anytime you integrate technology into your body, you are taking on any inherent risks of that technology. Me personally, I actually had Faraday fabric sewn inside of gloves that come up to my elbows just to protect myself for when I go out to certain places. A lot of the times this would be considered security through obscurity. Like, who would know whether or not you have an implant, and B, where is it? Me, I've actually not only said exactly which chips I have, but I've also described in my book where they are actually located. So if I have to look at myself as the same I would from a cybersecurity perspective, I literally in clear text said, these are the points that I am vulnerable, and the world knows about it now.
Does that not worry you though? That like if there was a bad actor that, had it in for you, and let's face it, there's a lot of psychos out there in the world. Does that not worry you? Like you've given them a map to how they can exploit you?
No, I'm not worried. Because the worst thing that they could do to me personally is basically brick one of my chips.
Okay.
And as much as that would be a bummer for me, I'm not really opposed to being cut up and sliced and diced by somebody in essentially a tattoo or a body modification parlor. It doesn't bother me. So worst comes to worst, I would just have to have it taken out and replaced. So it's not going to cause any physical damage to me. It's just going to make that chip inoperable for my own purposes from that point forward. These chips, if you go back in time a little bit, and you know, I don't see too much gray in there, so you look like a fine, you know, strapping young lad. You know, I don't know if you remember rewritable CD-ROMs.
So I would have been a kid at the time, but I am familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing about my chips are a lot like rewritable CD-ROMs. You can reuse them as many times as you want, but you can also write them and close them. So that's the biggest threat to me personally, is somebody essentially locking the chip to the point where it's no longer modifiable. But to that point, one of the chips I have is actually a credit card. So I can actually tap to pay.
This is what I was going to ask you next. Yeah. Like, hypothetically, let's say you're taken hostage, or I don't know, something like that.
Good luck with that.
Oh, how do you mean? Oh, I just in general, like, I'll kick your ass.
No. I'm not Mr. Tough Guy. You know, I'm not, you know, Mike Tyson. I can't beat up everybody. But the one thing about being taken hostage, I am from the west side of Detroit, and you're going to have to kill me where I stand. I'm not going to actually be taken hostage.
All right, fair
I remember the first time I started traveling, you know, to certain locations around the world that are a little sketchy, and my wife was like, you know, aren't you afraid of being taken hostage? I was like, no, I'll be dead on the side of the street. I'm not getting taken hostage, but my life insurance is good. You'll be fine.
It's just, but what if you're like, I don't know, somehow overpowered, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a possibility, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, the nice thing is the credit card is actually tied to a prepaid account, so it's not like a open credit limit. Okay. So it's almost like a prepaid credit card, and I typically don't keep more than about $20-$30 on it at any given time.
Right.
You know, so it's one of those, you know, in case I'm somewhere and I need something quick. But to that point, it's kind of like the same way I see all of my implants. You know, if I'm ever in a situation where things are out of my control, any damage to the implants, or, you know, another point to that is if I'm ever medically injured or incapacitated, you know, if somebody puts me in an MRI, it's going to be a very, very entertaining time, because things are going to start ripping out of my body. And what my answer to that has always been, if I'm in an incapacitated state to the point where I can't tell doctors or emergency personnel, hey, don't put me in there, I have bigger things to worry about. And yes, I would have some scarring. Yes, it would be messy, but it's not going to be fatal.
So like going to the hospital and getting any kind of surgery or checkups, or going to the airport.
The airport's nothing.
Really?
Airport is nothing. Absolutely nothing.
They're not good, like going, oh, hang on, you've got these 10 implants. What the
they can't. They can't. One of the main reasons I chose to go down this road in terms of my research is we have an amazing law here within the United States, and an even stronger law over there in Europe. And I don't know. I know since Brexit, there's a lot of different things going on in the UK, but are you guys still governed by GDPR?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if it. I believe it still applies here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you take a look at both the HIPAA laws and the GDPR laws, these implants are considered medical and therefore covered by the Privacy Act, because they're inside my body, and the agents at the airport are not allowed to ask.
Interesting. So
I'm actually using governmental law to protect my technology.
But do you not? Surely the metal detectors go off, right?
Honestly, most of the implants are silicon. So they're silica based. So before I actually had to have my first major medical implant done, which was back in February of this year, I was forced to have a full left knee replacement. Before that, I had been walking through the metal detectors without them going off since 2020. And the thing is, if they were actually noticed the bulge in my hand, all that I have to do is say it's medical, and they are legally not allowed to ask me another question.
How have the implants impacted your daily life? And also, have you experienced any unexpected side effects as a result of having these implants?
Now we're going to have to dissect that question just a little bit.
Sure.
So to start with, the simple answer is, have I had any side effects? Side effects don't necessarily mean a bad thing. From a medical perspective, I've had one medical issue. And the large chip that's in the top of my right hand is called a Flex Next. So it's a combination NFC and RFID. This particular implant, when I first had the procedure to get it installed, I should have listened to my body mechanic. I don't use doctors. I have not, my only interactions with doctors in relation to my implants, none of them have been good. And a lot of people ask, well, how do you get them put in? I like to pose a different question. How do you even have that conversation with your physician? I mean, look, think about it for a minute. I'm going to call up the doctor. Hi, Dr. So-and-so. I just bought this thing off the internet that I would like you to put in my body. Yeah. Number one, no doctor in their right mind is going to want to accept this kind of procedure just from a liability and risk perspective.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So we don't go to them. We go to the same people that would split your tongue or gauge your ears. We go to body modification parlors to have these types of procedures done.
Wow.
And the weird thing is according to both the US as well as most of the European and I believe the UK governments, these implants are considered body jewelry. I've never seen a piece of jewelry that actually had to have regulations around frequencies and things like that. Usually it's just a piece of metal with maybe a piece of glass or a gem in it, and you stick it through your ear and you're done. You don't have additional regulations, but these do. And I don't think that most of the governments out there realize the potential of what this can do to somebody. In terms of how it's affected my life, it's affected my life in so many different ways. For starters, one of the implants that I got, the magnet that's in the tip of my finger, this actually provides an additional sense that the human body is not born with. So when you put a magnet in the tip of your fingers, the amount of nerve endings in the end of your fingers, any subtle movement to that magnet will actually trigger a nerve response. So I actually have what we call magnetic vision. I can actually feel electromagnetic fields and currents.
Starting to sound like a superhero now.
I'm getting used to the hero comment. For most of my life, it would have been supervillain, but we're changing the stripes. I mean, there's two ways to get into doing cybersecurity. One is to go to college and spend a lot of time and money and take a lot of tests, and the other one is to just be a real stupid criminal for a long time. I took what was behind door number 2.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah. But in terms of my daily life, I'm assuming you know what an OTP or a one-time passcode is.
Yes.
These are like the codes that you will get from Google or Facebook when you try to actually log in. This is going to be for the YouTube people because unfortunately I don't think most people can see things over audio. But this is actually an app for one of my chips. It's called the VivoKey Apex. And let's see if I can get it on the first try. Nope. This is actually how I get my OTPs.
Oh, that's crazy, man.
So what I did was This is also my BIP32 crypto wallet key. It does PGP encryption. It's a security key. And I actually used it once to steal my friend's Tesla, because you can actually put your Tesla valet key onto the implant and then just get in the car and drive away. So that's one way that they've enhanced my life on a daily basis. I also, for people on the YouTube feed where you can actually see, I'm sitting in my office, and to get into my office, I actually have a commercial grade entry system. So I don't have a key to the door. I actually scan one of my implants to get into my office. So I've actually found a way of integrating these into almost every facet of my life.
Have you never had experiences where it just doesn't work though? Like maybe the door's just not open in one day, or?
No, the only time I've ever had an issue like that was when we had a power outage. And the truth is, if there's no power, then most electric locks actually fall down into what is called emergency fall down mode. And this is why when an industrial building catches on fire or there's an emergency, the emergency responders can just open the doors. It's just standard. So if there's no power, there's no lock. But no, I love these things. I think they make life so much easier, and they make life a lot of fun. The credit card in and of itself is enough to just create all kinds of dramatic situations, even when you don't want to.
I was going to say,
one of the first,
you can just tap the card reader like you're a wizard or something.
Yeah. The first time I ever used it, I was actually in an Avis rent-a-car up in Detroit, Michigan. And I was waiting in line to get my car keys, and I'm like, gosh, I'm thirsty. So I walked over to the soda machine, dude, give me a Pepsi, walked back in line, and there was this older woman that was about 4 or 5 people behind me, walks up thinking the machine's just going to start giving out free sodas. And she wound up like smacking the heck out of the machine, just trying to get it to give her one. And then she just gave me a dirty look. So, it's an amazing ability. And, it's enhanced my life, and it's actually given me a whole different perspective, especially with the magnetic vision. I can run my hands over older walls in older buildings where the electrical lines in the walls aren't as shielded, and I can actually trace your electrical just by running my hands over the walls.
So do you find yourself getting or finding alternative sources of employment sometimes where you get enlisted to do things like that, like just go into a building and survey it and help with things like that?
I do work with, I currently work as a futurist as well as a public speaker for CyberArk software. So we do have a red team, and I do work with them from time to time, but my current main, what's the right word I'm looking for? I don't want to say job, because it's more than that, but predominantly what I'm doing these days is a lot of public speaking and trying to make more of the people aware of the fact that people like me exist. Because the one question that you haven't asked is how prolific is this? And the truth is, there's between 60 to 80,000 of us that are currently walking the earth, which percentage wise is a relatively low number, but it's a number that I see increasing exponentially, just for the same reasons that you said when we first started talking. We've gotten to a point where between artificial intelligence, large language models, deep fakes, we can no longer believe what we see and what we hear anymore. And one of the things that I've been really focused on is, as we move into this new future, how do we essentially validate an individual human being? Did you happen to hear about what happened in Hong Kong about 4 months ago with the first deep fake fish?
No, I haven't heard about that.
There was a financial company in Hong Kong where one of the employees was asked to join a video conference with what he thought was his CEO, CFO, and members of his board of directors. And this was a video chat, kind of like what you and I are having right now. Everyone on that call except for him was a deep fake, and they wound up convincing this person to transfer $25 million. So as we move forward, we need a way to validate individual human beings. And I'm one of the people that thinks that there is the potential that microchipping someone, kind of like what you saw where I was getting my OTP codes, maybe this is going to be a way to basically be a source of truth for an individual moving forward.
This reminds me of a movie, and I covered this in, because I mean, there's so many science fiction movies over the last 30, 40 years that have kind of, in a way, predicted a lot of things that are now coming into fruition, but not in the way we imagined them. But
absolutely.
To your point, are you familiar with a movie called The Sixth Day? Right, so you know where I'm going with this. I'll just fill in the audience. So Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from the early 2000s, I believe. Basic premise is Arnie is a clone, but he doesn't know he's a clone. And the only way to ascertain if you're not a clone is through some sort of like ident in the eye region. So like if you're clone number 3, there'll be like 3 dots or whatever. I really highly recommend that movie. Just it's a great movie. But in terms of our conversation and deeper conversations about things like cloning and authenticity and stuff like that, it does beg the question, like, how will we now and in the future ascertain whether or not something is the real genuine article? And I wonder if it is things like that, like, not to sound crude, but like a certificate of authenticity that
absolutely
you scan or something. I don't know. But
well, one of the other options that I keep questioning is whether or not we're going to start seeing new types of services coming out and available for individuals. Almost, I'm calling it identity validation as a service. Maybe you're going to, at some point, in order to prove who we are, we're going to have to basically turn our identities over to a third party that will actually come in and act almost like a proxy to us. I don't know, but something's got to happen.
This is the terrifying thing as well. Like, and I think this is what a lot of people are scared about, is this idea of handing over essentially your freedoms to third parties or to government or to whomever, and they're responsible for it. Because let's face it, in the wrong hands,
they haven't done a good job. They haven't done a good job of protecting our stuff up to this point. I mean, look at the amount of leaks and
that's a fair point. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think it's more just kind of, you see, I think if COVID taught us anything, it's that people react differently to being told they have to do things a certain way or maybe not do things a certain way. I know here in the UK, at first people went along with the restrictions that were in place. They followed them. But then people began to get fed up. And it was more so when the rules didn't make sense or there were contradictions, stuff like that, which I think is totally fair and justifiable. But because of that, what happened? You had instances where people will all go out to the beach in mass and just completely disregard the rules. And was that sensible? Was that smart? No. However, the people that were telling them they had to do this didn't have clear-cut rules. They would say things like, well, you can be at home and mix with these people and one person from this group, but not this group. And it's like, well, what difference does it make if it's one person from this other household or 6 people? Like, you're still mixing with this other household who have been mixing with these other people. I digress.
Oh, yeah.
The point is, the rules were not clear. And so people were like, well, F your rules, then I'm going to do what I want to do. But the bigger thing that I noticed was that you couldn't control it. Once people en masse were like, oh, we refuse this, we're not going to follow your rules, there's nothing the authorities could do other than
try and force things through restrictions, detainments, and incarcerations, which doesn't work either.
Yeah, because you can't arrest everyone. You can arrest some people, but not everyone.
No, I don't think it's going to be one of those things where it's going to be a forced thing. I think it's going to be a voluntary thing just to be able to remain current. I mean, the other thing that I like to point out is we're moving away from traditional computing. Mm-hmm. We've gone to prompt computing where you don't have to code anymore. And to your point, if we look back at things like movies, let's use The Matrix. Uh-huh. I use The Matrix The Matrix and Terminator are my 2 favorite movies to use as points within these conversations. If we look at the Matrix, all we saw was that scrolling code because, we were seeing what the actual code was. Whereas if you were in the Matrix, you saw the world. How do we know how to deal with AI and large language models? Because there's different code running behind the words that we're giving it. Is something like being able to connect to the technology utilizing its own protocols going to keep humans relevant in a new age of computing where the code is not as important as the words to the general populace? But if you know how to code and you can talk to the machines on their language, does that give us an edge as we get to the point where these machines are becoming, quote unquote, more intelligent than we are?
The one thing I've noticed with a lot of these deep fakes that have like now in the last 5 years, they've become really sophisticated. Like I've seen that it's been rapid development.
Oh yes, very much so.
Before it was a lot less obvious, it was a lot more obvious that it was fake. The moving lips,
the eyes were always
right. They're not quite right. I've seen a few in more recent times where I wouldn't be fooled by it, but I could see how people would be.
Oh yeah.
And I think
absolutely
that's the key is you only know to look out for it if you know to look out for it. Like I've been hyper fixated on this stuff for years now, so it's like it's not going to happen to me. But well, I mean,
let's be honest.
You cross-check things. My point again is you know what to look out for, you know what to avoid. Just as an example, like different scenario, but case in point. When you get messages from your bank, sometimes they'll say things like, we would never do this. We would never send you a message in this manner. And okay, that's what I need to follow. But there's still things that sometimes catch you out. Like I had an email from Amazon the other day regarding like a tax interview related to my Twitch account that I don't use anymore. And I looked at it. And something looked off at first, and I investigated it and looked around it. And then eventually I realized, like, no, this is a legitimate email. But there was a second of doubt, and it's because I've seen so many scam emails that are getting a little bit more sophisticated, but ultimately are still ones that you can decipher pretty quickly. But again, only if you know what to look out for.
And the truth is, most users are looking for convenience.
Sure.
They want something that makes their life easier. And after spending 30 years in IT, I can say with 100% confidence that I've never seen anything that makes an end user's experience easier, that makes it safer.
Interesting. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, because if it is safer, then there's going to be a load of annoying protocols and different loopholes you have to go through, which like I think that a lot of the time when I'm dealing with like two-step authentication, like I had an issue with my email recently, but I did think like, actually this is good because it's been a real pain in the ass to sort this out, but that's good because if someone were trying to hack me, it would be a pain in the ass and maybe they would give up. I don't know. But
yeah, because the truth is hackers and bad actors, because I don't want to say hackers because hacking is not a crime, but it's how you hack and what you hack. But I'll call them bad actors. They don't care. They're not playing by the same rules that we are, and that's, something to very much keep in mind is, we're all playing under the rules that were given to us. They're not. So to be able to protect ourselves, we have to start looking at the threat landscape as a whole and not just the things that, like you said, every single email that has to come in, that comes in, has to be scrutinized. And the truth is now, because of people like me, even text messages have to. One of the attacks that I actually debuted was the ability to use these implants to trigger an SMS text on someone's phone as a phishing attack to somebody else and using them as a pivot. If I got a hold of, your producer's contact information and I was able to get into their phone trying to get to you, and you got a text message from your producer, you wouldn't think it was wrong if it was coming from their phone number.
Wish I had
You
a
know,
producer. No, I take your point. Yeah, it's. I mean that is a solid point as well, because a lot of the time when it comes down to hacking an individual or scamming an individual, it is about getting to those closest and pretending to be that person, and then the person is less suspicious, so their guard is down, and therefore they're easier to hack or scam. So it's a solid point. I
absolutely.
mean, but I don't know, man. There's so many different avenues I could take this conversation right now. Let's since we're talking about overall hacking and the dangers, and
Mm-hmm.
I've asked different people about this on the show previously. I've appeared on other people's shows and asked them about this. So I've been delving into cybersecurity a lot over the last year. What would you say are the biggest dangers that we're facing in the field of cybersecurity, hacking, and everything in between?
Apathy. Apathy. 100%, I will say it's apathy. You know, there was a time in not too recent past where if somebody's data was leaked, it was a big deal. If a company was compromised, it was making, headline news every night. Now, how many people have gotten one of those letters from a large corporation that says, we're sorry, but your information was compromised and we're going to give you 2 years worth of free identity monitoring.
Mm.
So in my opinion, the biggest challenge we face is apathy to the existence or the acceptance of these types of breaches and loss of our personal information. We used to care. We don't anymore. It's become normalized. And I think that is the biggest problem. If there was a big enough response to what's going on in cyber right now, people would actually deal with it. But I believe in most cases, not all, but most, I feel that companies and enterprises are more concerned about the bottom line, and it's easier to just pay for the credit monitoring than it is to actually fix the systems. And in the lack of outrage by users, I believe has actually emboldened corporations to actually continue this type of practice, to where security is the afterthought. And at the end of the day, it's all about dollars and cents. The other thing that I would say outside of apathy is these things: cell phones and mobile devices. I think that is the main way that most people are actually getting themselves into issues, especially on a personal level. Just because we no longer look at these as connection devices, they become entertainment devices. And most people, I love putting this into context. So, Christian, this is the first time we've ever met. I'm going to ask you a very strange question, and I want to see your face. If I was sitting right next to you right now in the same room and said, "Hey, Christian, can I look in your wallet?"
No.
But if I was to say, "Hey, Christian, let me see your cell phone for a minute, man. I got this amazing video that I want to show you."
Mm-hmm.
There's a 50-50 chance that you're going to put it in my hand. And the truth is, there is infinitely more personally identifiable information on your mobile device than you could ever put in your purse or into a wallet. We are looking at technology through eyes of the non-technical. We think that just because our driver's license and maybe a credit card in our wallet, we need to protect that. But you probably have mobile cash payments on your cell phone. You probably have banking applications. You probably have medical applications, potentially business applications, all on your cell phone, and we treat it like it's a toy.
Well, I think, and again, I brought this up when I had a conversation with Win and a few others as well over the last year. I don't know that the average person is really taking it seriously enough, which obviously has become apparent in this conversation, but it's kind of mind-boggling because people don't seem to be taking anything seriously. Like, people think that like AI is a joke, And it's like, yeah, but it's literally killing industries.
Yeah.
It's being used to scam people. You know, eventually the scam artists are gonna wise up and be able to use it in a more sophisticated way, and they're genuinely going to scam a lot
Oh,
of
I'll give you.
people.
Did you see the article that just came out the other day about one? I believe it was either Google or Microsoft.
Oh
One
dear.
of their, it was one of their AIs that actually discovered. Are you familiar with what a 0-day attack is?
No.
0 days in cybersecurity means it's a brand new exploit, a way to compromise something. Nobody has a fix for it. It's brand new. So one of the AIs actually did a code review on SQLite, which is a very lightweight database. It's used all over the place in mobile applications, and they turned the source code loose into this AI, and it actually was able to find a brand new exploit for SQLite that had never been discovered before, and provided the code to use to exploit it. So we are now at a point where the AIs are actually discovering new exploits and ways of attacking software. So it's not just the people anymore.
So you mentioned Terminator earlier.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think you know where I'm going with this.
Well, let's talk, because I got something about the Terminator that we're going to bring into the real world that I think is really going to make your head spin.
As you were talking there, the first thing that I thought of was how in the Terminator movies, Skynet, Cyberdyne, they what happens is it gets like the security and protocols and everything gets handed over to the AI, handed over to Skynet, and then Skynet essentially takes control of everything, and then seemingly is simulating World War III, but then doesn't, and recognizes it can take control of all the world's computers, which it does, and then it essentially takes over by, from what we understand, hacking everything, you know, and using its exploits, its knowledge to do that. Do you think there's coming a day where that is a real possibility in the real world?
Yes.
I mean, it certainly looks that way, doesn't it?
Yes. And the one thing, all of the, we'll say the westernized countries, you know, and I'm not saying they're the only ones, but there is basically a coalition between most friendly nations that says we are going to limit the utilization of AI for the purposes of warfare. And it wasn't even until within the last 6-7 months that OpenAI actually changed their rules and terms of usage to where it could actually be utilized for things like warfare, new weapons, according to, you know, and the US government started doing it. So the point to that is this is all the friendly nations. What about the ones that are not friendly? You know, we're taking Google, who is working under the rules, and it was able to find a 0-day. What about the nations that are basically developing AI for the sole purpose of cyber warfare or advancing physical warfare? You know, we're back to the idea of we don't know what we don't know, but we know what this technology is capable of. You know, so that was a really good question, but let me give you a different thing to think about. And we're going to stick with the Terminator for just a minute. You know, we've talked a lot about the idea that I have these implants. There's 60 to 80,000 like me out there. The one thing that people don't realize is there's no legitimately legal way to detect us. Period. You know, you brought up the airport, which is one of the places that most people are understanding in terms of restrictions and security. But let's look beyond that. How do you detect an augmented human? You can't ask because of the HIPAA and the GDPR laws. If you wanted to actually detect us through some type of technological way, you'd need one of those kind of metal detector type archways, but instead of magnets, you would need to be listening on low frequency and high frequency for every single NFC protocol, every RFID protocol, and then you would need to know every system and be able to interpret the results. Then you have to determine whether or not that person is a threat or not. Are they using this chip just to be able to get into their garage or so that they can get into their Tesla? Are they using it like me to just do OTPs? So one thing that, and the idea of running somebody through an actual X-ray machine every time you walk in and out of a building would be extremely unhealthy with the amount of radiation that would be given to the people. So there's no legit legal way. However, I do have one thing, and we're stepping right into that, back into the science fiction movie scene. If we remember Terminator, what was around everywhere the rebels were? What was out in front? And yes, I'm asking you to go back in time and remember the movie. Wherever the rebels were, what did they have at the front of where their strongholds were? Dogs.
Uh-huh.
Because the dogs could smell the machine, if you remember.
Right.
Well, one thing that most people are probably unaware of is there are new types of detection canines that are actually designed to detect technology. So most people are familiar with, explosive smelling dogs and drug smelling dogs and cadaver smelling dogs. But there are now dogs that actually are technology smelling dogs that are trained to hit on a chemical compound called triphenylphosphine oxide, which is actually one of the main chemicals used in circuitry and hard drive creation. These dogs are not used like drug dogs, where they're not going to be at an airport and they're going to walk up and go, yes, Christian has a cell phone, he has tech. These are used in cases of human trafficking and pedophilia, where after an arrest is made, they will get a search warrant for these suspects' domiciles, and they'll go in and look for portable hard drives or thumb drives or USB drives. I found a couple of places here within the United States that have these dogs, and I've been trying to work out an opportunity to go in to see if the dogs can actually smell the chips that are underneath my skin. Because that is about the only way that I've come up with currently that you could actually detect one of us that doesn't violate privacy laws.
Other than your efforts with ethical hacking, forgive me for like how I structure this question. It's just I have to ask.
Go for
it. Are you almost using yourself as like a test subject in a sense to gauge the world's security and almost like probe the world to try and actually, because you've mentioned this a few times, you said like they can't detect me, I'm undetectable, none of us are detectable. Mm-hmm. So are you trying to like push it to the point where you will become detectable? Is that the goal?
Yes. Well, I don't know about that so much, but am I doing it as a big glaring neon sign to every security professional and every organization out there that says you guys are not as secure as you think you are? Yes, absolutely. I've been saying since 2020 and my first implant, how do you stop a cyber attack if you don't even know that it exists?
What led you to that decision to first? Because it's a lot. I mean, body modification in general is a big undertaking, but what you're doing is affecting and has affected the way that you interact with things, your life, everything. It's a big undertaking, and I can tell straight away that it's one that you were prepared for and you knew the risks, etc. So I understand that. But
there was a lot of research. And this didn't start with implants. It actually started by using wearables. So I was using a couple of different little metal rings that had NFC chips in them. And, I described the very first time I ever tested this theory. You want the backstory? We're going to have to actually digress a little bit. So I've been basically breaking into computers since before there were even networks. My first, what I consider to be hack, was actually on a Commodore 64. I was coding a Frogger type game, and where I made some errors in the code and inadvertently created a God mode. to where my little frog guy, he could get run over, he could jump in the water, and it really just kind of set my mind ablaze. My first network hack was on a token ring network in my high school. You know, it wasn't really much. It was back on Windows 3.1.1 for work groups on a token ring. And I was doing a drafting class, and our instructor had a folder that had not only where we were supposed to put our daily work, but it also had every exam, midterm, and test that we would have for the entire course, all 3 years of it. I found that in my first year and made a ton of side money selling tests and exams for the next 3 years. I've been breaking into computers since before we were, you know, even really doing anything with computers. Back then, I didn't consider it hacking. I was just messing around. The hacking became a way of life for me. But the thing is, even when I was a black hat, I was never a malicious black hat. For me, it was more always about the puzzle or the restriction than it was what I could find on the other side of it. And when it comes to the body modification, I tell people I have one tattoo that starts at my neck and it just goes all the way to the bottom of my feet. I've been into body piercing, and I do flesh hook suspensions as a hobby. So the idea of putting my body through trauma was never really something that bothered me. But I was actually well aware of the transhuman and grinder community back when around 2012, 2013, when Grindhouse Wetware first came out. And this was a group out of Pittsburgh that was selling subdermal implants for consumers. But at the time, they were only putting out things. The first one was called the North Star V2. And it was just a circle that you would put in the top of your hand, and it had LED lights in it. It kind of made you look like Iron Man. Kind of cool. But as somebody that was trying to be inconspicuous, it just didn't really suit my needs. And it was actually towards the end of 2019, right before COVID, I was in Amsterdam on a job assignment. And one of the places I typically will go, you know, some people collect spoons, some people collect tea towels. I collect stickers from tattoo parlors and body mod parlors. And I was sitting at a tattoo shop in Amsterdam, and somebody was talking about another tattoo and body shop down the railway at the next town over in Utrecht, where they were actually they were putting in RFID and NFC microchips. And that went from, this is no longer just a way to sensationalize the fact that I'm different with LEDs in the hand, to where now I actually had an input-output capability. So I was not able to actually get to that parlor on that trip, but it opened the door for me, and I started doing the research on the plane ride home, finding out that there's two major distributors of consumer grade implants. One of them is called dangerousthings.com, which is based out of Seattle, Washington. And the other one is a company called KSEC, which is based right there in the UK. So it was it was one of those things where I loved the idea, but then came the research. I travel for a living for my job, so I had to make sure, like you said before, am I allowed to fly with these things in my hands? What type of restrictions could be imposed on me? And I found that there really is none. And then to vet out the attacks, I actually, like I said, got rings with the NFC and the RFID chips. And I actually went out to dinner one night at a restaurant here in Austin, Texas, with a couple of friends. And this is actually depicted in the book under the chapter Dinner and a Show. The maitre d' actually used a Samsung tablet to check everybody in with their point of sale and their scheduling and software. And I basically social engineered this guy to where he would give me the tablet. I was like, hey, is that the new Samsung whatever? I'm thinking about buying one of those. Can I see it? And I was able to walk the entire pathway up to the point where I was ready to download a Trojan onto this guy's tablet in less than 12 seconds. And that proved out the attack. But during the research in terms of the legality, that's where I came across something called, and I am probably going to butcher this because my Latin is really, really terrible, but I believe it's called mens rea, which essentially means malicious intent. Anytime you are committing a crime, there has to be malicious intent in order for you to be prosecuted. For example, let's say you wind up trespassing somewhere, but you didn't mean to trespass somewhere. Does that make you a criminal? No, it means you made a mistake. If you have lockpicks, if you have a cloned access card, that proves malicious intent. You were trying to bypass this security point. So doing the research, I realized that once these things go into my body, like I said, they become personally identifiable information and they become part of my medical history. I have just removed any ability for law enforcement to prove malicious intent.
There's a lot to depack there. I guess the biggest thing I've been wondering is why be an ethical hacker? Why did you move from black hat to white hat? Like why not be a criminal?
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, state-funded vacations are really terrible. You know, the amenities are terrible. There's no there's no free brunch. The mattresses suck, and the exercise room is not all that fun. But the truth is, what turned me around completely was when I was handed my granddaughter for the first time. You know, I will freely admit, and I make no excuses for my behavior. And to be honest, my book doesn't really paint me in a good light for the majority of the first part of the book, because I wasn't a good example. I was a one percenter, if you're familiar with that term. So when it comes to motorcycle clubs, you know, your one percenters are the worst of the worst. I had no problem with being a bad example to my own children. But for some reason, when they handed me my granddaughter, it was like staring at every single one of the mistakes and bad decisions that I had ever made in my life. And I broke. I mean, it was one of those truly life-changing experiences. You know, I couldn't stand the thought of my grandchildren coming to visit me behind bars or at a grave. And the choices that I was making in my life up to that point were to steal a coin phrase from Alcoholics Anonymous. The only three destinations that were in my future were either going to be jails, institutions, or death. And I couldn't do it. So I made the decision that I was going to change my stripes. And I went 100% in the opposite direction. I shaved off my beard, and if anybody knows anything about me, my beard is my trademark. You know, the thing is almost down to my waistline. I'm like the hacker version of ZZ Top, but I shaved it all off. I quit. I managed to get out of the clubs in good standings, and I joined a cybersecurity company. And it was one of those, I didn't want to be the bad guy. I wanted to be just like everybody else. And honestly, for the first 6 or 7 months when I started working as a cybersecurity professional, nobody knew I had a tattoo and nobody knew anything about me. And it wasn't until 2018 when I was at the Black Hat conference when my employer said, you can wear a short sleeve shirt. Nobody wanted to talk to the salespeople from that were the clones of every single booth. You know, they're all basically the same. They all wanted to talk to the guy that looked like he just got off the Harley out in the parking lot. And it was actually my boss that brought me back into offensive security. You know, he saw that there was something there, and I was able to give people a realism that most people in cybersecurity can't. You know, the big thing when it comes to cyber is the catchphrase has always been, you need to learn how to think like the attacker. You have to, try and imagine what the attacker is going to do. I don't have to think like an attacker. I just have to think, because that's how I normally do. I'm not like the defensive people who walk in and go, oh, we need to put up firewalls. I walk in and go, oh, you guys left an open USB port. I never sit with my back to a door. I was brought up on the west side of Detroit in a very, we'll say, colorful childhood, and it's definitely shaped the way I view the world. And I don't think I could do the things that I'm doing now with the experience and the understanding had I not been through that kind of a traumatic upbringing. And I found a way to turn all of that into something positive.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's just really, really inspiring stuff. I've said it a lot to my audience over the years as well, that choice is what defines us in life. And I don't really believe in this idea that any human being is like inherently evil or good or whatever. It comes down to choice. We all make mistakes. Absolutely. And, you learn from your mistakes and you try to do better. You try to be better. And in the context of what we're talking about as well, I mean, I can't help, sorry, again, to think of the movies, but what tends to happen in the movies? The government or whoever always contacts that hacker, that person that used to be bad, now is good, etc. Right? And they paint it in very black and white terms, but the reality is that that person is going to know better than anyone else, because, as you said, you view it totally differently. You look at the exploits, the things that no one else sees. It's like a detective coming onto a crime scene and looking and seeing the things that maybe like the police officers didn't see or the coroners missed or whatever. Like you're trained to see it in that way, but you're coming at it from a different perspective. And that perspective is so valuable, because now you're seeing the whole picture and not just, say, 30% of it. And I find that fascinating. And I think that it's really important work that you're doing as well. Like,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of those. It's like I said earlier. I don't think the world is taking this seriously enough, and I've been banging on about this till I'm blue in the face about AI, about the issues with technology. I've quite frankly, I look at technology as being something that we should be in awe of, but be very careful with.
Absolutely.
It's just all these movies, all these stories for the last 50 odd years have been trying to warn us. And I find it baffling, to be honest, that the governments, the companies, the people are not taking it seriously and just think it's one big game. Like, oh, isn't this great? And it's like, yeah, and it can be, but there's a lot of dangers and risks that y'all are not taking seriously. And as like the example you gave with phones earlier, spot on. I mean, I've joked to friends before, like that phone gets stolen, you're fucked. Like, pardon my language, but truly, you are. If you've not you've not kind of got things sorted in such a way that it's only a minor risk to you, then you're totally screwed. Like what you said earlier about your implants and how they're locked to a certain degree, and like you can only, I mean, even with cards these days, there's a limit. And why is there a limit? Because if someone does hack you, if someone does steal your identity, steal your stuff, they can only do it for so long and for so much. So it's not, there's still a way to
there's checks and balances in place,
right?
And you brought up another point that I would love to get your thoughts on. One of the other aspects to this book that I'm really trying to get out there is the fact that, we need to stop looking at our identities as different things. Our physical identity is completely intertwined with our digital identity, yet we treat them as two separate things.
Well, I think there's still a disassociation, because the internet doesn't feel real. It still feels like an extension of life, but I mean, we see the consequences of that every single day. I mean, if you take
absolutely
like a rudimentary example, people online giving you abuse, just for argument's sake.
Well, let me give you a better example.
Go for it.
Let's say I skim your credit card in the physical world. I can then use that in the digital world. And quite the opposite. Let's say you have cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
I can steal your digital currency and affect you in the physical world.
Yeah.
You know, and when it comes down to it, when we're talking about identity theft, they're not stealing your identity in terms of your face or your fingerprint. They're stealing some digital profile of you that contains information about your physical attributes. So one of the things that I'm really trying to push with this book is the human and the tech, the biological and the technological, are already irreparably intertwined. And we need to see them as a singular entity, because one affects the other in any case of compromise.
Couldn't agree more. I think that we will begin to see that over time. It's just going to take something pretty big to make it clear to people, and I don't know what that thing is. I mean,
I don't know what else we need to show. I mean, take a look at what happened with CrowdStrike not even a couple of months ago. That was the big one where almost every major enterprise Windows system around the world shut down and blue screened. I mean, I was actually stuck in Australia for an extra 2 days. So the idea that digital doesn't affect physical, how many breaches is it going to take? How many more of these letters where you're going to get 2 years of free credit monitoring? How much more is it going to take?
I feel like if we're going to enter a fully digital world, we need to have the physical plan B as a backup that's always accessible. So what do I mean by that?
I hate to interrupt you, but we've already gone past that. We have moved so many of our integral, systems, public relations, emergency services, wastewater treatment plants, energy plants, all of this stuff that used to be able to be addressed through manual controls has now moved completely into a digital controlled environment. A lot of these services are no longer even an option outside of the digital.
Well, that's going to become a big problem when, for instance, electricity goes out.
Absolutely. EMP, electricity loss, we've already gotten there. And the thing that most people don't realize is there is technical dependence. There's technical addiction. And the signs and the symptoms mirror heroin addiction.
Do you mean, what do you mean, just consumption in general? Or?
I mean, withdrawal symptoms when removed.
Right. Yeah. Well,
and
yeah.
So we know this is bad for us, but yet we're pushing more services that way. I mean, here in the United States, a lot of the health and human services stuff, the only way you can really get to it for the most part is through an app.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've kind of outlined a lot of the dangers, but like at the same time, as I mentioned before, a lot of science fiction over the last 50 years has given us various scenarios, if you like, and often extremes, but stuff that you should pay attention to. But another one that it has kind of outlined is in those dystopian scenarios where there's been an end of world situation, the ones I've often paid attention to have been the ones that are a bit more grounded in, how can I put this, like what's happening now, or at least like the one with electricity, I think is an interesting one, because if everything gets paralyzed, if everything gets shut down, as you said, it affects the physical world. So there's restrictions of movement and how you can move around, how you could do things. Like, I think the idea of completely phasing cash out is just, it's dumbfounded me, because I'll give you a recent example that will prove my point exactly. Now, it was small scale, but it was kind of dystopian. So I do a lot of work in hospitality to make ends meet. I'm stuck. Who isn't? Anyway, I was working the kiosks at this venue, and all of the Wi-Fi went down. Now I know you know where I'm going with this. So
Happens all the time.
I'll explain for everyone. Now, of course, everyone understands what happens when Wi-Fi goes down, but what you may forget is that payment systems are linked to Wi-Fi. This is why sometimes when you're in a restaurant or whatever, and the server comes over to you and says, "Oh, sorry, the Wi-Fi is not working. Could you come over to the desk and pay there?" They mean because it's out of range, and if it's out of range, it won't work. It won't process anything because it's using the internet to look, connect payments, etc. In this venue, everything went down in terms of the payment systems. So I had, let's say, 50 people in front of me angrily going, "Can I pay? I'm sorry, the Wi-Fi is down." "Well, I've got cash." "We don't accept cash here." "So what am I supposed to do? Like, how can I get the food and drink?" And I'm like, "There's nothing I can do." There's as I understood, it wasn't just the building; it was every network that this company operated across the UK in various venues. The whole intranet went down, which meant they just could not process anything.
Yep.
So people just couldn't buy anything. And I said to the people there, after trying to explain 4 or 5 times, they weren't listening to us. But for the people that were listening, I said, you can chance it. You can either wait for however long it takes to get this fixed, or you can walk away. But there's nothing I can do. And I felt powerless in that situation. But the first thought I thought was, this would have been easily fixable if we had cash.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we have cash?
Honestly, I think if they do switch to a completely digital payment system, we're going to see more precious metals coming back out again, silver, gold, platinum, and it's going to go back to the barter system like it was prior to any type of actual currency. I've got an old four-wheeler outside. You've got a wood chipper. It's going to go back to bartering, but I don't see individualized transactions going away. I just think it's going to have to switch to something different.
I agree. And I've spoken about that here on this show before. But the trouble with that is ascertaining on a commercial level what's equal to what. So like with cash, we accept like, okay, this is $10. It has the value of $10, and we both accept that, and we accept what it can buy, what it can purchase for that $10. But if you then say like, "Oh, I'll trade you this bag that I've got for your watch," and you're like, "Well, the watch is easily worth $10,000," and you're like, "Well, let's say that the dollars doesn't exist anymore." Well,
I get where you're going.
It's clearly not a fair trade, and it's like, well, who decides that then?
The two individuals that are involved in making the trade.
Exactly. But then that's going to be tough trying to get people to, for the most part, agree what is worth what. What's the
I agree.
worth?
And one more, I agree with that statement, but one other point to make on that last thing that you were just talking about, the digital payments, especially the tap to pay, that's rooted in an unsecured protocol. That's NFC. And I tell people all the time, when it comes to an Android phone, it's very easy to address these. You can turn that off. But Apple recently, with the iOS update for 16, has just set it to where native read of NFC can't be turned off. So
what their game is with that. Why do that?
I don't know. I know that a lot of it has to do with the loss that Apple took in the European Union around standardization. They lost the ability for the Lightning connector and had to switch it over to USB-C, and the NFC chip, which used to be proprietary and only able to be accessed through an app, was turned native. I don't know why. But in doing so, they have made their devices less secure.
That always used to be a big selling point with Apple, supposedly, was that they were secure. wasn't it?
They are more secure when it comes to the applications because you can't get outside of the app store. But the base technologies that they've now made native have undone a lot of that security potential.
Scary times.
Well, interesting times, scary if you let it be. Like you said originally, the at the end of the day, I think we are all responsible for our own security, be it digital as well as physical. you know and if we stop looking at these devices, like I said before, as if they're some kind of a toy or an entertainment platform, and start looking at them in terms of what they actually are, which is one of the largest collections of your own personal information anywhere in the world, then it doesn't have to be as scary. But in order to get to that point, we really need, as a society, to start looking at some serious behavioral modifications around how we treat, number one, our own personally identifiable information, and number two, the devices that have access to them.
What has hacking taught you about life?
What has hacking taught me about life? Nothing is certain. The people who claim to be the most secure and the ones that are up yelling and screaming that, we're the ones that you want to use, are probably not the ones that you want to use. It's very difficult, especially in the society that we're living in, to make the conscious choice that you're going to do the extra steps to protect yourself when everything could be so easy. But at the end of the day, what I would implore people to do is realize that by making it easy, you're making yourself a target. I can use Cambridge Analytica as a wonderful example. All of these little tests and quizzes and things that we see on social media. What's your rock star name? All you're doing is giving away information. And most of those are psychologically based. If you wouldn't tell this to any stranger off the street, you shouldn't tell it to some application that's harvesting your data.
That's the crazy thing about it as well, is we know that that's happening. We know that it's told to us on a daily basis, and we choose to ignore it. I know we spoke about it earlier, but that just baffles me. Like, I don't think people realize just how serious this is.
Well, I think it's, honestly, I feel like it's generational. I really do. I'm Gen X. I grew up in a time before the internet, and the differences between me and my children and my grandchildren, and just the lack of, oh gosh, I don't know, the lack of concern over what's going on around us. My generation, we are very, very skeptical. The current generation, one of the things that I did just as a test is I went into one of my daughter's feeds on one of her social medias. And just for the heck of it, I just started going back through, and I was like, all right, let's see if I can find what school she went to. Well, there's a picture of my daughter on her first day of school. Okay, can I find any pictures of our home address when we were younger, or where she grew up? Oh, yep, there's that one. What about her first car? Oh, there it is. So basically, the answers to every self-service recovery portal question, I was able to just get off of her Facebook feed that she had put out there to the world.
Terrifying, that. No, that's a really obvious one. Like, I never post pictures of like where I'm at unless it's long after I was there. There are some exceptions here and there, but like for the most part, like I'll never like, people are like, oh, are you going to do a tour of where you live and show us where you live?
No.
Why would it do that?
Like I said earlier, you'd be basically doing what I'm doing and just giving people the roadmap of where all of your security controls are.
Right. And then, so like, why is it any different to like your personal information? If you wouldn't give that willingly, freely, then why are you doing that?
And that's because it's easy. Because it's easy. And realistically, how many people look at, the end user license agreement on their apps and what access that we give it on our phones?
No.
I remember one video game that, my daughter was installing one time, and she was like, "Dad, why does this video game need access to my camera, and all these other functions on my phone?" I was like, "It doesn't. Don't install it." Everybody just says, "Yep, okay, I want what I want." And it's that instant gratification of I want, as opposed to what's safe. And I really wish that people would actually realize that once this stuff is out there, it's not changeable. I talk a lot about personally identifiable information. And the reason I do that is, when we talk about passwords and things for a computer, we say that they should be three things: unique, complex, and constantly changed. I think biometrics are bad. I think using any type of PII is bad because these are things that can't be rotated. You can't change once they've actually been compromised. Once I know all of your historical data, you can't change the first car you ever bought. You can't change the high school you went to. So we need to start looking at things that can't be scoured and pulled from the internet as security questions and unique identifiers to an individual human that can't be modified, because we're only us and we can't change ourselves.
A couple of final questions for you.
Absolutely.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've ever received, I would probably have to say that the only time you ever make a mistake is when you don't learn something from it. Because believe me, I've made a lot of things that most people would consider mistakes, but I look at them as nothing more than learning experiences. What's that old expression about Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb? It took him, a couple hundred different things before he realized that, some carbon on a piece of string would actually provide light. And everybody used to say, "Oh, you failed, hundreds of times." He said, "No, I just learned hundreds of different ways not to make a light bulb." It's only a failure when you look at it as a failure.
Some solid advice there. Thank you. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
That I am not just a collection of every mistake I have ever made, or every bad thing I've ever done. And, we are not defined by individual acts, but by the life that we choose to live overall.
Could not agree more with that. Solid point. Thank you. Final question for you of this amazing conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure. Do you have any upcoming projects or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I do. I actually have quite a few projects that are in the works. I'm currently in the process of putting a Raspberry Pi Zero W in my arm. So if you don't know what that is, I'll let me find one here for you. There you go. So this, and this is for all of the people on the stream, is a computer. This right here is a full computer.
Wow.
This is a single board computer, and for those of you not on the stream, it's about the size of a stick of gum. This right here is going to be implanted in my arm. So all of the implants that I have up to this point, like I said, they're all passive, and I need that receiver in order to do an attack. With this, I'll be able to actually reach out and attack people from anywhere. So instead of the requirements of near field communication and RFID, once that's implanted, I can go after full computers, I can go after internets, I can go after Wi-Fi, I can do any type of an attack that any hacker could do with a full laptop. And once again, it will be inside my body, so therefore having the same medical protections. And it's going to actually increase my attack capabilities by almost 5,000%. One of the other projects I'm working on is we are scheduled and slated to start filming a documentary around me and the transhumanism. We start filming in December. Hopefully that'll be coming out first part of Q1 of 2025. And that is a co-project with Barcode Security. So we've got a movie coming, as well as I have a couple of new books that I'm working on. I'm actually going to be stepping away from the nonfiction, and I'm going to try my hand at some hacker fiction novels.
Ooh.
So there's a bunch, you got your Tom Clancy's, and there's hundreds of authors out there that are writing, dramatic stories about the governments, but there's really nothing out there for cyber. So one of the tricks of what I'm working on is the only reason that it's going to be fiction is because it hasn't happened yet. And there's actually going to be a link to different examples of the types of hacks that I'm using in the book, so you can see that these are actually all real. So it's fiction to the point it hasn't happened, but all of the technologies and the exploits are all going to be legitimate and possible.
So much exciting news there. First of all, congratulations. That's amazing news. Secondly, if you need an actor, voice actor, musician, content creator, or podcaster for any of those things, please get in touch with me. I would love to work on that with you. But
hey, absolutely. I mean, I just think that there's enough content out there for everything else, but there's nothing out here for us. So the main fictional novel, just to give you a little something to mull around in the back of your head, it's kind of a cross between Fight Club meets Sons of Anarchy meets Mr. Robot.
Very cool. Very, very cool. This documentary, do you know whereabouts it will likely land as far as like being able to view it? Because I would love to see that documentary. I know our viewers will.
I will definitely get back in touch with you once we get closer to the release date. We are going to be doing screenings all over, and we've actually been discussing Cannes as one of them. So we're definitely going to be hitting the film festivals, and it will probably be available to view off of my website, www.i-am-machine.com. I am machine. And that's also where, if you'd like to, I've got some new stickers and autographed books available there as well.
Fantastic. I will make sure to include those links in the bio and the description for this episode. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Len. Thank you so much for your time and
I appreciate the opportunity, man.
Absolute pleasure. And to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, I will say, make sure you go, if you're subscribed to the Patreon, make sure you go check out my episode on transhumanism to kind of get a bit of a buffer on this as well. And my episode with Win Schwartau as well. Go out of your way to check Len's work. There's so much more that I haven't even. I've skimmed the surface with Len today. There's so many more questions I had for you, but I know your time is precious, so thank you very much. And
one last thing, if I may.
Absolutely.
Just a quick shout out for the book. If you would like to check out my book, it's actually called Human Hacked: My Life and Lessons as the World's First Augmented Ethical Hacker. And the cover has some really cool pictures of x-rays of my hands on it with the implants in place. So I really appreciate your time today, Christian, and I'd love to come back in some other time and maybe we can talk some more.
I would absolutely love to have you back on the show. Absolutely. You're always welcome. Massive thank you once again to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and I'll see you as always in the next one. Goodbye.